Good morning. I am Diana Colasurdo. I think some of you might have been expecting Brooks Aucamp. That is not me. Happy to be here, happy to be talking about crisis management on Twitter. So to just jump right in, I think everyone in the room might have experienced or seen some organizations who have maybe flopped a little bit on crisis management in their own right in the last 2 to 3 months. Or even the last 2 to 3 days. We've seen a lot of mismanagement of crises from certain organizations around the hurricanes that we've seen down south. So we're excited to be talking today about how you can be really successful with crisis management and how you can use Twitter as a tool to do that. So first, what I'm going to be speaking about is why would you even use Twitter as a tool for crisis management and how you can be really successful in doing that. So to start, so Twitter is where people are coming in a discovery mindset to find out information and to find that information rapidly. So Twitter actually breaks news 15 minutes faster than any other platform, whether it be, any other social platform, news, television, broadcast. So it's a place that you can actually disseminate information and speak your truth very quickly. And we're going to talk about how some organizations have done that very successfully. With that, Twitter is an essential tool for crisis management, and we're going to give you some keys to actually incorporate Twitter as your essential tool in every day. But it doesn't stop there. Twitter can actually protect and strengthen your organizations, your brands, not just in a crisis. So has anyone in the room actually experienced a crisis in your organization and utilized Twitter? Anyone? Good. Okay, cool. So there are people that have actually used this. But what I'm going to talk about as well is not just using Twitter when the crisis hits, but actually using it in an always-on strategy. So before the crisis hits, when you're in that crazy live moment, and then afterward as well. Because it's really important to get trust from your audience and build equity with people that really matter to your organizations and your brands. So first, as I mentioned, talking about Twitter being that place for discovery. So I spoke a little bit about this, but Twitter's super fast. So it's where people are going to discover information, news is breaking, you have reporters and press constantly refreshing their feeds. So you can really speak your truth, get your information out very quickly utilizing Twitter. It's also public. So I think one of the things that I love about Twitter is that it's an ungated community. So there are many other social platforms where it is gated. You're only speaking in somewhat of a bubble. But Twitter's super public, so you can get out information rapidly to everyone. And that's really important during a crisis because you want your information spoken to as many people as possible. Moving forward. Again, that discovery mindset. So I think I spoke just about that bubble. Sometimes people are in somewhat of a thought bubble, just seeing the information that they care most about or that they want to care most about. But people on Twitter see every side of an issue. We actually have a new mantra at Twitter. It's called See Every Side. So when a crisis breaks, there's tons of information out there, whether it's misinformation or it's truth. And so it's really important for your brand and your organization to speak the truth. It's coming also directly from you as a very reputable source. So making sure that every side of that information is being spoken to when people are in that rapid discovery mindset. And finally, conversational. As I just alluded to, you as the organization are incredibly important to be speaking that truth directly from the source. But I think one of the most powerful things about Twitter that I love the most is that you can have direct one-to-one conversations with whether it be celebrities, politicians, authors, which is a really cool experience that I just had myself. You can have those one-to-one conversations. And I think when we're talking about crises, it's really cool that you can have these conversations with reporters, you can have them with stakeholders, you can have them with influencers. And so if you care about getting that information out, you can get that information to those people that I just mentioned, and it can be key to you managing that crisis, and getting out information very quickly. So let's talk about how Twitter is an essential tool for crisis management. First, I want to go through some keys to crisis management, and then I'm going to talk about examples of partners that we've worked with that have used these keys to crisis management very effectively in their own right. So first is clarifying the situation and correcting misinformation. So as I mentioned before, tons of information is flowing during a crisis, all different sides, maybe not the most credible sources. You are the most credible source, so clarifying the situation at hand and correcting any misinformation is incredibly important, and you can use Twitter as a tool to do that. As I mentioned, you're the organization, you're the most reputable source. Advancing your organization's story through positive messaging. So this is actually really important potentially after a crisis hits. So I'm sure that every brand and organization has partnerships. They're doing great work in the community. They're doing great work with charitable organizations. So one great way that you can actually manage a crisis after it hits, is to advance positivity from your organization. What are you doing well? What's great about the organization and partnerships that you have in place? And I'll talk about some examples of how brands are doing this. Engaging users quickly and directly. And this goes back to what I spoke about. Twitter's super rapid and Twitter's conversational. So you can have those quick and direct conversations when that moment hits, and I'm going to show some examples of how this has gone really well for some of our partners as well. And then I always want to mention this. It's important to have a strong team around you. If you are that point person when you're managing a crisis, make sure you have comms and legal at your side so you can also have people and ideas to bounce off of. So clarifying the situation and correcting misinformation. We've worked with Ford Motor Company, and during the presidential debates, there was some information about how they were pushing jobs out to Mexico. And I think a very important point to mention here is that they actually planned for this moment. They knew that this might have been something that came up during the presidential debates. And so what they did was they had infographics, they had copy ready and at hand to push out when this moment actually occurred during the presidential debates. And not only did they do that and made sure that the public was aware that that was misinformation, but they also then started to respond in real time to reporters, to stakeholders, to those asking questions on Twitter about, was this actually information? Can they confirm, how many US jobs might be shipped elsewhere? And so I think that that really speaks to the power of Twitter and how they were able to manage the situation quickly and get it under control and get their truth heard to the masses. Advancing positive messaging. So some of you might remember this issue that Airbnb experienced in 2016. So they faced allegations of discrimination from some of their hosts. And that was not what Airbnb stood for as a company. So they took this negative and they turned it into a positive for their company and their organization. So they responded by incorporating a mass campaign about acceptance. And it was called Accept. And they had creative, they had copy, they had a large-scale campaign speaking to how they are an accepting organization, they're an accepting platform. And they had actual people from their company and from actual users of Airbnb, hosts of Airbnb, who were accepting and spoke to the morals and ideals of Airbnb. So again, turning that negative experience and that crisis into a positive as their response to what had gone on in 2016. So engaging audience quickly and directly. So there's a number of ways that you can do this, and I love the way that JetBlue did this. So Valentine's Day is a crucial day for most people in the US. You want to get home to loved ones, you want to see people that you care about, whether it's family or a significant other. But JetBlue canceled almost all of the flights, 139 of 156, due to weather out of JFK, which was a mass issue. And after that happened, many angry customers, their CEO put together a customer bill of rights, stating that they would address their customers in real time and use Twitter as an integral tool to do so. So Twitter has many ways that you can actually speak one-to-one with users, and the way that JetBlue incorporated that one-to-one connection was using the direct message feature. Has anyone incorporated or used a direct message feature on Twitter? Yeah, so you're familiar. Good. So the direct message feature on Twitter actually allows you to have private conversations on Twitter. So you're messaging people on a one-to-one level privately. And so what JetBlue did was when somebody actually @messaged JetBlue, they took them into this private experience where they were able to give them a credit for an issue that they experienced. They were able to have customer service members from the JetBlue team speak to these customers and just handle any issues that they might have come up. And so they got fabulous results from this. People had far better feedback and experiences with JetBlue. And again, this was an integral piece of that customer bill of rights for JetBlue. So let's talk a little bit about protecting and strengthening your organization always, because this is the very important piece of this is that it's not just about when a crisis hits that you need to be prepared. It's before, during, and after. And there are 8 ways that I think really speak to how you can do this. And I'm going to first talk about giving your brand a human face. So we did a study with Nielsen that showed that there is 133% higher emotional connection when people are included in frames of the first few frames of a brand video. And so we saw this again with Airbnb, and I spoke a little bit about this with that acceptance campaign. And Airbnb actually incorporated their own users. They incorporated their hosts, but real-life employees were used during a Super Bowl component of this campaign, speaking to how they truly feel that Airbnb is such an accepting place to be a part of. And people just have such a stronger connection when humans are used in those campaigns as opposed to just graphics, imagery, copy, just to get that, again, that human element, that human connection. Leveraging key executives. So I think this is a big one. And we have a quote here from Mark Andreessen. He's a venture capitalist and a tech entrepreneur. Is anyone familiar with Mark? Good, good. So this quote is about Twitter, and it speaks to just kind of the echo chamber, how reporters are so obsessed with the platform. And I honestly think what better way to leverage Twitter when there's such an echo chamber of conversation happening and really influential users utilizing the platform than with a key executive. Because if you are building equity with your brand and you're building trust with your consumers, having a key executive push out your messaging to build the trust, and then when a crisis hits, to actually speak to those consumers and discuss what has happened, what has gone on, and kind of disseminate the information, speak the truth, is incredibly powerful because you already have built that trust. And I love the example here from Tesla. So Elon Musk is a household name, and he is an executive from Tesla. But everybody knows his name because he is a comms person as well as a CEO. And so Tesla took a ton of heat. They had a Model S that caught fire. And Elon Musk was the one who managed that crisis. He was the face of that crisis management. So if you have a key executive that you can leverage, I think that is a very strong strategy. And again, not just during the crisis. You need to build the trust in advance, and again, after, and continue that momentum to make sure the face is there for your organization. Activating influential third parties. So this is a pretty large statistic. Almost 80% of global decision makers expect that their company will experience a crisis in the next year, but only half of those have a plan in place. So in the room, and you can be honest, do you believe that your organization might face a crisis in the next year? Okay, that's good because you're here, so hopefully this is helpful for you. But truly, I think that most organizations and companies rightfully expect there to be a crisis. And I think one really strong tactic that you can leverage is any third party that you have, whether this be, and I mentioned before, if you have a strong partnership with a charitable organization, if you have a strong partnership with press, if you have any strong third-party partnership that you can call on in that time that will be a trustworthy voice when maybe your organization doesn't have as much trust with your consumers in that moment. And I think this is a great example. Volkswagen has had a bit of trouble in the last few months and maybe year or plus, but the Associated Press was a trustworthy partner that they could leverage in the time when they were dealing with diesel emissions scandals. And so the Associated Press had written a positive story that we have an opportunity called whitelist. Whitelisting on Twitter means that your organization can promote content from another partner and push that out to consumers that you care most about. So in this instance, Volkswagen promoted content from the Associated Press. This was positive content. They could draw upon the influence of the Associated Press and the trust that the Associated Press had in this moment that Volkswagen did not. And this was a very strong tactic that Volkswagen used and that anyone in this room can also use as well during a crisis. Immersive formats. So immersive formats are a paid opportunity that we have at Twitter, but just something to consider. This is, I think, very important video, and I'm sure you've been hearing this from many people, many different partners, is incredibly strong right now across the digital scape. It has been performing very well, and I think it lends that additional human element to any type of creative that you might want to push out. For Twitter, we have 360-degree opportunities via Periscope. Is anyone in the room familiar? Good. Everyone's familiar, I'm sure. But I think there's a few different, beyond the 360-degree views, which again bring users in and give a truly human element to any type of content you're trying to push. There's a number of different formats that our partners have also leveraged. And this, I think, is important before or after a crisis, maybe not in the midst. And we saw this with ExxonMobil and Budweiser. ExxonMobil used what we have called Moments. Moments curates tweets into one tweet that you can push out. And these can be highlights, things that you really care about, whether they be positive moments or specific tweets on a specific subject that you want to then curate into one tweet and push out to your audience. And ExxonMobil did this to highlight their commitment to aspiring engineers. And again, this speaks to the opportunity to then push out any positivity around your brand or your organization. And this was that Be an Engineer effort that ExxonMobil pushed out. Budweiser used what we have called conversational video. Conversational video allows consumers to click on a call to action button underneath a video creative, and I'll show you that now. So consumers can click on that call to action button. That pre-populates a tweet, and then that user can tweet that out to all of their followers. With this, Budweiser used that creative around a Give a Damn effort, but this was to push out responsible drinking messaging. And again, if you face any type of issue or crisis, I think these are two very strong ways to ensure that your consumers, your stakeholders, or even press are aware that the organization has very charitable efforts or efforts that are positive and caring and strong and not in that negative light that you might have just kind of undergone. And then ad formats and targeting that mitigates risk. So Twitter has several opportunities that allow for, again, mitigating risk, so really keeping things contained and controlled. So two strong examples that I want to talk about. The first is ads without profiles. So ads without profiles allows you to target to very specific audiences without actually having a Twitter account. So this is great because it takes away the heavy lifting of having any type of organic content. Perhaps you have an effort that you want to push out post-crisis, and you have specific messaging that you want to get out without having any prior content, any prior organic, again, heavy lift. And so this is a really strong tactic here to utilize. And secondly, this is similar, but slightly different. We have dark tweets. So if you already have an organic account, but you want to hit a very specific audience and have that audience only see a subset of tweets, you can utilize dark tweets. And this targets that particular audience with advertisements without that tweet showing up in your timeline. And so, again, if you're trying to hit your stakeholders with a particular message, you're trying to hit press with a particular message, maybe you're trying to address a certain subset around your crisis, but you don't want the masses to see that content, this is a great way to do so. And I will caveat that the tweet is still searchable. But again, if you do want to get a message out to a very particular audience, this is a very good way to do so if you already have a Twitter account. Okay, getting personal with customer service. So we did another study with applied marketing science and found that there was a 30% increase in the likelihood that users would recommend a brand if they got a reply. And so this goes back to the JetBlue example that I talked about. So JetBlue understands this concept, and they did a lot around actually having those one-to-one connections with consumers. And so I talked about the direct message experience. T-Mobile actually launched a separate effort, a separate handle called T-Mobile Help, where they were specifically responding to users within direct messages. They had a team dedicated to speaking to those users if they had an issue, if they had a question on a product. Again, this just lifts the perception of the brand, helps the brand have positive experiences with their consumers. And I want to mention, too, we now have direct message bots, which automates this experience if your organization does not have the bandwidth or the manpower to actually have the customer service members to actually speak to these users. Okay, we're coming to the home stretch. So I want to talk a little bit about focusing on goodwill, and we already talked a good deal about this, but this stat talks a lot about this via a Unilever consumer study. 33% of consumers buy from brands based on their social impact and their goodwill. So doing good in your community, working with charitable organizations is something that most organizations do, but they don't necessarily talk about it. So I think, again, post-crisis or even pre, to build up that trust and the goodwill with your consumers is so important. Make sure that you're talking about that. Make sure that you're pushing out messaging around those good things, the positive things. Because then if you're faced with something negative, you've already built up that equity. And I like the example from Delta. And I mentioned a little bit about airlines kind of having a tough time right now. But the airlines do a good job of actually speaking to some of the positive impact that they're making on their local hometowns and charitable organizations. So Delta partnered with the Red Cross, and they had a 24-hour giving day. And so this was a great example of how they actually showed some of that positive social impact, and they pushed out that messaging via Twitter. And then I just really want to hit home on the fact that building momentum and having an always-on approach really is integral. Making sure that you have the equity with your consumers. You can use the tools that we spoke about to make sure that you're hitting the audiences you care most about so that they're aware of the good things that you're doing before and after something happens. And then again, you have the tools during a crisis to make sure that you are getting out your message rapidly. And making sure that people are discovering all sides, your truth most importantly, when something actually does happen. And Airbnb, I think, is a very good example of an organization that took a negative, turned it into a positive, and they are now constantly on utilizing Twitter to push out positive messages, whether it be around pride, whether it be around women's equality, and again, that acceptance message that they're constantly pushing out to their users, their stakeholders, and the press. So thank you very much for your time, and we have about 5 minutes if anyone has any questions. Yes? Yeah, so I think following reporters if you're talking about an organic opportunity. So I think following reporters is always really helpful. Engaging with the reporters' conversations, if there's particular reporters, subsets of reporters that you care most about. I think focusing on the reporters that you actually want to reach. You can always @mention particular users that you care a lot about. And then we also have paid opportunities, of course, where you can target particular reporters. We have tailored audience lists that you can use. We have handle targeting that you can incorporate where you're targeting users who look like particular followers. So there's a lot of things you can do from that perspective. Sure. Sure. I'm sorry? I probably wouldn't speak about any particular campaign unless given the opportunity to do so. So I don't have their blessing to do that. Sure. So I think, first and foremost, if an organization has a stake in a particular legislative issue, I think it's, of course, a great idea to push out messaging, and I think Twitter's a great place to do it because in terms of the DC influential market, we've seen amazing success with bills being turned over, getting responses from the White House. So I think that that's a positive thing. In terms of a negative, I think it's dependent on the organization. If the organization doesn't want to be as showy, then maybe this isn't the best venue for them. So I think it's very organizational dependent. But I think if you want to get your message out, you want to have your voice heard, and you want to make sure that your truth is told, I think there's no better venue than Twitter to do that. Hopefully that answered your question. Yes?
Are you familiar with the Sleeping Giants Twitter account?
I am not.
It's an account that is focused on exposing or bringing awareness to companies whose ads are being served on controversial sites like Breitbart,
Sure.
others like it.
Okay.
Calling out companies publicly on Twitter whose display and remarketing ads happen to be, appearing on these sites.
Mm-hmm.
Be in packages which most companies are unaware of.
Okay.
And so, what are your thoughts, or what are Twitter's thoughts on a media atmosphere in which companies are increasingly being asked to take political sides?
It's a good question. Well, I first and foremost believe, and I think we get a lot of questions on those types of accounts. We very much believe in the First Amendment, and I think that Twitter fosters the atmosphere where people can take political sides. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, he's asking about a particular account called Sleeping Giant. Is anyone familiar with that here? Several people. And he's asking about Twitter's thoughts on organizations taking political sides on Twitter. Is that right? So I think that Twitter fosters free speech and the First Amendment, and I think that with that said, it allows for an atmosphere where people can really speak their truth and say what they think. And in particular climates, that is sort of the way that people have been engaging with the platform.
Are there any recommended best practices for delivering the message? For example, we've tried everything from linking to a statement, taking a screen grab of the statement, turning a statement into a thread of tweets. Is there any data that supports which approach might be best?
Sure, that's a good question. So there's a few things. If you have a long statement, and I know Twitter is about the short 140 characters, and sometimes longer statements that's difficult. So a few things on that. I think linking out to a longer statement and then utilizing the highlights from that statement within your tweet has worked very well. So I think that's a really good tactic if you're able to link out and go to a website that maybe gets more information. So if your director is going to be your key executive and you want, is it a him or her? Her? If you want her to be the face of your organization, I would say have the director be the face and the microphone, and then retweet from your organization. Sure. Any other questions? Good questions. Yes. I'm sorry, what was the chat box? I've heard that used. I personally don't have bots. Okay, sorry. I thought it was I don't have any personal knowledge of that because it doesn't exist. I have not. No, is the short answer. And chat box, no, because it's not a thing. Yes. Oh, sorry. I think we have two separate questions. I'm going to take yours first and then yours second. No worries.
Okay, so you have having people direct message in a crisis instead of basically tweeting to you. Did that go and actually help them? Their, basically positive attribution versus negative attribution in the reporting sense?
So the question is around positive versus negative attribution when somebody is responding to a crisis.
And they're going through direct messaging instead of tweeting to you.
I see.
And you go and you have metrics that basically, hey, still we look good.
Yes. Utilizing direct messaging and seeing positive attribution versus negative attribution. And when you talk about attribution, are you speaking about? Sure. Okay. I don't personally know of the statistics around that. The small reporting sample that we have shows that there are a lot of positive side effects of using direct messaging because it has more of a human feel to it. Yes. Sorry, there was another question in the back. Okay, and are you talking, when you say opposition, the question was around opposition using Twitter to respond to a crisis. Yeah, that's a good question. And I think for that, again, it's campaign by campaign, organization by organization. If it's something that is kind of in competition in a way, I think that the most important thing is maybe not, and the way that I've seen it used best, is maybe not to compete with the other side, but just make sure that your truth, your message, you stay on point and make sure that you're just disseminating the information appropriately and sticking to your message instead of kind of responding, if that makes sense. That's how I've seen things work out well and be responded to most appropriately. Anything else? I think we're over time. I apologize. But thank you so much, everyone. I hope you got a lot of good information.